Hello, my name is Earl Smith and this is The Earl Smith Show. Today I want to talk about something that I find incredibly concerning, and frankly you should be concerned as well because it involves the future of our nation. I mean, nothing less than that. I'm calling this the enemy within. I'm a member of the Vietnam generation. That era very nearly saw our nation irreparably collapse. Elements of the far left, socialists, communists, and anarchists alike, were taking advantage of the national divide the war had fermented, and they worked tirelessly to destroy our nation, and they came close to succeeding. Thankfully, no important political figures publicly suggested that our nation should collapse. That is no longer the case. Sadly, too many ill-informed and or undereducated voters fell for the siren song of the uber left, who promised the world to recruit voters who have no idea that nothing in life is truly free. As Maurice Isserman, a charter member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and a teacher, an educator at Hamilton College, don't miss this, an educator who's likely indoctrinating our students, he writes of the successes of avowed socialists, House of Representative members Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, as well as Cori Bush of Missouri and Jamal Bowman of New York. He notes that if socialists are able to continue doubling their numbers in Congress, it would take only 6 election cycles for the socialists to become the dominant force. And socialism is nothing but another word for communism. What is socialism? In an ideal world, which of course doesn't exist, ideally socialism would be an economic and political system under which the means of production are publicly owned. Production and consumer prices are controlled by the government to best meet the needs of the people as determined by the state. What is important to understand is that contemporary communism is simply an offshoot of socialism. It is sometimes called revolutionary socialism because it advocates the takeover of governmental powers by the working class through revolution rather than incremental reform. In other words, by any words, they are actually largely synonymous. Socialism is simply the gateway drug to communism. And communism is never magnanimous in its execution and result. Never. So why should you care? Socialists and communists are simply flip sides of the same coin. In 1847, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels co-authored the Communist Manifesto. Yes, that is a real document. A manifesto is the policy, plan, and philosophy of a group. In other words, the Communist Manifesto is nothing less than the Bible for the Communist Party. Marx states that the private owners of land are forever exploiting and oppressing, that's his words, exploiting and oppressing, the working class. How do socialists or communists address their alleged abuses? They have a list of 10 short demands. Abolish ownership of all private property. Establish a system of heavy taxation. Abolish the right to inherit. Centralize credit and establish a state bank. Centralize communication and transport within the state. Confiscate all immigrant and rebel property. Extend the means of production to the state. Equalize liability to all levels of labor. Combine agricultural and manufacturing industries. And establish a free public education system. But of course, the state once again decides how your children will be educated. In summary, under a communist system, citizens, people with rights, no longer exist. Only laborers for the state, for the so-called collective good, exist. Work for your entire life and own nothing. Things you would like to pass on to your children, not permitted. The state decides what is in your best interest. You are not free, nor will you ever be. In fact, communism is simply the mother of mediocrity. Work hard or work little, it's all the same in the end. Why is this such an issue now? In a nutshell, we are actually electing socialist/communist traitors to public office. And they are traitors. They run against our system of government, our valued constitution that guides the operation of our nation. We are quite literally inviting the enemy into the political body that makes laws for our country. We might as well hand matches and gasoline to an arsonist. We are literally becoming the facilitators of our nation's doom. But those who embrace socialism or communism, and even some are anarchists, will promise us that we are worrying about nothing. But what is the historical reality? In an article published by Rudolph J. Rummel, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, University of Hawaii, now deceased, entitled "How Many Did Communist Regimes Murder?" Dr. Rummel shares details from his wide-ranging and in-depth study of what he terms democide, murder by government. He notes that his figures are conservative. But to give the murders of countless civilians a face of sorts, let's look at some of the worst offenders in communism. Dr. Rummel notes that some countries seem to have fewer deaths because, frankly, they have smaller populations to murder. Soviet Union, roughly 61 million people. Communist China, well over 1 million, and probably 10 times that. Other mass murders would include North Korea as well as Tito's Yugoslavia. Cambodia alone killed 2 million of its people, over 8% of its population. In sum total, the numbers approach over 300 million men, women, and children killed by governments, or a little less than the current total population of the United States. It is interesting that Dr. Rummel summarizes the numbers of mass killings and thinks they are diminishing. But when he wrote this many years ago, it was likely the case. But in the ensuing years since Dr. Rummel authored this study, many former communist nations have tried to escape the shackles of communist government, but others, notably Russia and China, are cracking down as never before. And let's add to that North Korea, Iran, and others. And Iran is obviously not a communist nation, but is a nation ruled by government. They are proving once again that under communism, freedom of any sort is simply incompatible. So back to socialism in America. Make no mistake about it, socialism is never the end product. It is merely the first phase of the transition to communism, period. As is discussed in the International Journal of Human Sciences, and as Karl Marx wrote, communism has two phases. The first or lower phase of communism is called socialism, and that is the phase between capitalism and communism, a transition phase. The second or higher phase of communism is the so-called perfect stage. There is no inequality or injustice in this stage. A communist society is classless. Products are delivered according to the individual needs, except that's an outrageous lie. There is no communist country that has ever put the needs of the people before the needs of the state. So the truth is that capitalism is completely replaced by socialism, and socialism is ultimately replaced by communism. At that point, the people become little more than slaves of the state. It is worth noting that historically every single oppressor first disarmed its citizens. Turkey, Russia, China, Cambodia, Guatemala, Uganda, Venezuela, and so on. And others who, whether they're rigidly communist or only a totalitarian regime, have all ensured that citizens will be unable to resist the rule of the masters. The next segment, we're going to talk about what we can do to counter this. Because we are either going to live up to the expectations of our Constitution, or we are going to submit to the rule of the state. There really isn't any in between. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you soon. I'm afraid we're all gonna fall down in two. If you need a job done, they'll take your money and run. Too many folks don't give a damn if they help you. Now don't y'all get me wrong, this is not a judgment song. You know, I've heard a lot of folks, myself along